We are recording.
Okay.
Here you are.
Okay. Are they going to come? Are they coming? I think they went a different way.
Yep. They must have went to the cabin.
So while they're standing out, back there, the mountains that I can see, what are they called?
So these are the tobacco root mountains. If you notice, there's a big fan, geological formation there of erosion. It's called an alluvial fan, and that's where a lot of the fertility comes from, is from the decomposed granite minerals and topsoil that built up and kind of washed out through all the, you can see one over there too. But this topsoil here in Waterloo is about, it ranges anywhere from like 3 to 10 feet deep from the buildup, from the soil construction. And so the Amish were looking at moving to Montana, so they did a bunch of testing and exploring and stuff, and they found this place, and this is where they wanted to be because they wanted the best soil that Montana has to offer. So this is in the top shelf of Montana fertility, just natural fertility. That light alluvial loam, so it's not clay, it's not sand, but it's gypsum based, so it's got a lot of minerals in it, and just fantastic grassland soil. So,
Which brings us to this.
yes.
So
we are out in the asparagus patch. We have 2 acres of asparagus, regeneratively grown. And asparagus is one of those really neat things that's a perennial. So it comes back every year. We don't have to replant the asparagus every year. Typical life of asparagus is 20 to 30 years.
Wow.
So once we establish the asparagus, we'll have successive annual crops, until that gets through that entire life cycle. And we actually have asparagus is dioecious. It's one of the very few plants in the world, like 5% of plants, where you have different plants representing the different sexuality. So you have the male plants and the female plants. Typically, conventional asparagus is grown with all male hybrids because the males tend to produce a higher yield, whereas the females put a lot of the energy into making seeds, and you see little balls on plants as we walk. Those are going to be female plants, and the other ones are going to be males. So we have the ability to grow more asparagus off the seeds right here from the legacy stock. And we do that. We grow them in a greenhouse and we sell them at our markets for other people. So this legacy crop of asparagus here, some of it goes back to 2010 and some of it goes back to about 2017. We started from the back and planted this way in multiple plantings. As we grew our markets, we had to grow more asparagus and add 2,000, 3,000 crowns at a time. So this last 10 rows was a 2017 planting, which meant our first harvest was 2020, the COVID year. And it was the most amazing providential timing because our markets had lost access with the supply chain disruptions of various farms, having output problems with COVID, the worker situation. So we tried our best to fill some gaps and got into some grocery stores for the very first time in 2000 because of COVID.
wow.
Yes. They opened up a number of grocery stores to us, and of course once we provided the fresh asparagus and the plants, it was like, you're coming back next year, right? And we've been doing it ever since.
So okay, pardon me. So you plant, and how long does it take before it starts to bear fruit?
So asparagus has to take about 3 years to establish, to fully establish. You have like different stages of asparagus. So you have like the first year where they're kind of like toddlers. They only get about a foot tall. And then the second year they're like, primary school, second graders. Then you have like college kids, and then you have adults. And you can tell how old the plants are by how big they get. Some of these will get 7 feet tall. And asparagus is always growing for the following year. So it's sort of like a potato in the sense that it stores everything underground in the roots, but rather than one tuber, like one central unit. It stores it in these huge, long, fibrous root systems. So asparagus root systems can go 15, 20 feet down, 20, 30 feet in all directions. It's just this huge spider web of roots. And the summer growth is basically engorging those roots with all of the production that the plant is making through photosynthesis, all of the interaction it's doing with all of our cover crops, and it's storing in the roots, so it goes into a fall dormancy. And as soon as the temperature comes out of winter, at about 52, 53 degrees, when the soil hits that temperature, it wakes up and it starts sending up the shoots, like new growth. And so the harvest season for asparagus is about a month to 5 weeks, and you just cut everything that's coming out of the ground because it's just wanting to grow and it's warming up, so it's growing faster and faster. It'll grow 6 inches in a day, 8 inches in a day, depending on the temperature. It's all temperature based. And it wakes up when the temperature hits there. So you have to, some springs are earlier, some springs are later if it's cold, it just varies from time to time. But you harvest for a month, and then you basically deplete the root system. So it's producing all of these different shoots and spears like you see in the stores. And then you let it grow out to fern out, what's called ferning out. You see it's fairly large. And the ferns then grow for the rest of the summer and fall to replenish the root system. And so you're always growing for next year. And when you harvest asparagus in the spring, you're harvesting last year's growth that overwintered in the roots. So as soon as the asparagus starts coming out to grow like this, the photosynthesis kicks in, and that changes the chemistry of the whole plant. And what used to taste really good in the spring when it was coming out from winter tastes terrible now once the photosynthesis starts, because it creates a chemistry change in the plant all the way into the roots and everything. So regenerative agriculture is a little bit different, because if you go to a different asparagus field that's conventionally grown, you're going to see bare dirt mostly. They use herbicides to kill all of the competing weeds and grass and everything. Regenerative agriculture is different in that we're trying to enter into the ecosystem that's already here and use the processes that are going on to produce a crop while we're building fertility in the ground, as opposed to just basically extracting a crop or extracting what we want. So what we do here, and generally the general principle is, we grow multiple species of cover crops: grasses, legumes, clovers, tillage radishes. Some of the mixes that I use are 17 different species. Some of them are grown just for flowering, to bring in the pollinators, to bring in the bees and the butterflies and stuff, because they end up pollinating our veggies. They end up pollinating, the asparagus seed. So we're actually entering into a bigger ecosystem, and the goal is biomimicry. We're trying to copy the natural processes of health that happen in the natural world. So we're very much watching many different species growing. We're very much paying attention to what's going on underneath the soil, like at the soil level with soil biology, because that's where the life and the health comes from. Because if you can build healthy soil, you're going to have healthy plants. And so out here, since 2010, we have not used any synthetic fertilizers. We've not used any synthetic herbicides or poisons. And yet we can grow profitably without bug problems, without other issues, because we're trying to work within a balanced ecosystem process. So come take a look. We'll show you what we're talking about here. So if you notice, this purple flower is actually a legume called hairy vetch. And this has the same properties of like beans and peas and peanuts, to be able to take nitrogen out of the air and work in a symbiotic fashion with bacteria in the soil to fix nitrogen in the air. So this hairy vetch is part of our cover crop because it's basically putting nitrogen from the air into the roots and ground level around the asparagus. So we're using a natural species to fertilize the asparagus. And as we go, you'll see there's a few different species that we have. This is This is vetch coming up as well. And we have different kinds of weeds. We don't really think of them as weeds in a traditional sense within the regenerative side. We think of them as, you know, a community of biodiversity. This is a baby asparagus right here that seeded itself from the mother plants. Okay, so we can also dig them up and transplant them if we want to. Now what we do typically through the season is we actually mow this a few times. And if you notice this, all the clippings, they're just digesting and rotting straight in the soil. And that provides nutrition and food for other organisms, everything from fungus to bacteria to different kinds of insects. And ultimately, what we're really looking at is trying to build our worm population, our earthworm population, because that's really key in the regenerative system. So if you look at this, just random, see how soft that is? When I dig this up and pull this up, you're going to see our worm situation. You're going to see how crumbly and light the soil is. So we have worm population doing their thing. We have like crumbly soil with roots kind of clumpy. So over time, by avoiding too much disturbance, all of the different biological life creates its own little home and happy place. So the less we bring in the tractors, the less we till, the less we plow, the more life sort of develops within the system. And the worms are kind of key because what they do is they tunnel inside there and create air pockets that get into the soil and create an aeration for other microorganisms like bacteria and fungi and various microorganisms that are really key to soil biology. So the idea is the less disturbance, the better, which is the nice thing about asparagus. It's planted once and it just grows every year, so we don't have to, you know, plant a new crop, annual crop like grain or corn or something like that every year. So we're allowing the soil biology to feed itself and create a stable balance, health, fertility system that is really relying on the sun, if you think about it. Because every time we cut, all of the clippings go down and they just disintegrate in the soil, feed the biology. Biology helps everything to grow, so it grows up. We cut it again. Also, when you cut it, the roots exude more organic matter in the soil because they slough off roots when you cut the top. And then in the fall, usually our process is we'll bring in cows when we get to the very end of the year, and they will eat all the grass, pee and poop everywhere, stomp on it, tromp it down. Usually 50 or 60 cow-calf pairs, you know, maybe 40,000 pounds of beef in here for 2 or 3 days. And in that situation, we're basically mimicking a buffalo herd, essentially. Just like in the Great Plains, when you had huge buffalo herds that were sort of wandering over the prairie, usually chased by wolves or, you know, other predators, they would wander from place to place, and then they would come back to the same areas, but only after like a year or 2 or 3, and the whole place would regenerate. So it's called intensive grazing, and it again is that biomimicry. We're trying to copy the natural processes using, you know, the closest thing we have is cows. So that's our fertility system. And what we do with that is we integrate it with our greenhouse, because the soil that we use in our greenhouse is the soil we grow out here. So then the soil that we actually build up and bring in fertility and bring in a diversity of microorganisms and soil biology goes into our plants. And then those plants get sold at all the markets in the grocery stores in our local area. So the life that we are sustaining and encouraging and developing here gets sent out to everybody else's gardens.
Can you imagine if everybody did that?
Because we use no chemicals.
Right.
We use no chemicals in our greenhouse either. So people think they are buying the plant, right? That's your sell plants, right? You want to buy a tomato plant, you want to buy a pepper plant. But it really is a system. It's a life system, because you have the soil, you have the plant, And then I spend about 3 weeks every February or March, as soon as the ground thaws, mixing the soil from here along with our other like components, right? Getting ready for the greenhouse season. And so from this regenerative practice here, we can produce about 20,000 plants that get sold through the greenhouse. And if our gardeners are avoiding chemicals and using organic processes or regenerative processes, this is like a little bit of Noah's Ark, and life here gets disseminated to all these different gardens. So people don't realize they're buying that. They think they're buying plants. But if you understand the soil biology of what we do here, it's much, much bigger than that.
Yeah, so it would be good to educate more people on the way that you're doing this so that they can mimic that at their homes.
Right. And on my website, covenantgardens.com, we have a number of articles about what we do and why. Regenerative articles, how-to articles. We actually sell our seed, our asparagus seed, domestically grown right here in Montana, for people that want to start their own asparagus from seed as well. So that's where the website, the greenhouse, and the regenerative agriculture out here all come together. And it is an educational outreach, and we have participants that come join us and enjoy what we do. Of course, working out here is hard to consider work.
Right. So I had said not too long ago that
come take a walk. Let's just walk down the road with the camera.
I had said that asparagus would be bad for you in heaven, and out of nowhere, Tim says, "You've obviously never tried purple asparagus."
Yeah, purple asparagus is a very see all the scurrying going on? We have life everywhere. See that organic matter is the building blocks, the carbon building blocks for everything that happens under the soil. Let's see what we got. Let's just see. Yeah, there's one. Now, in a lot of American farmland, you see how crumbly the soil is? That structure is a result of the life that's in the soil. There's another one right there. It's a different species. It's some kind of grub, probably a moth or a butterfly. But see how crumbly that is? That's the result of the soil, microbiology of the soil just sort of building its homes. So the more invasive we are at the soil, the more destruction we create on that biology. So by being very invasive, you can actually destroy the biological health just by planting, harvesting, tilling, driving tractor over it. We try to avoid that as well. So if you get, it just gives you an idea of all these guys. If you do the math on these earthworms, there's large parts of American agriculture in the Midwest that have 0 earthworms. They've all been dead, killed by the chemicals, by the plowing, by the creating of a hard pan, because the more you plow, the more structure goes away and you get like smaller and smaller particles and it turns into a brick, right? And so that blocks airflow from going into the soil, which all the biology needs. All the biology of microbiology needs the air. So the earthworms are basically a key species because they're bringing a whole bunch of other life as the natural result of their presence. And you can actually do the math, because you can figure out how long of a tunnel a typical earthworm will dig in his lifetime. And you do the math based on a cubic foot, how many earthworms you can get. So you can know how many earthworms you have per acre. And if you can get it to 20, 30, 40 earthworms per cubic foot, they're putting in like 25,000 miles of tunnel per acre.
Wow, 25,000
miles of tunnels per acre.
Wow.
And every one of those earthworms dies at the end of the season or when its life cycle is over.
Wow.
And that all turns back into a high sustenance fertilizer for the plants themselves. So it's a self process, a self continuation process, basically from the sun, the rain, our sprinkler system, which is coming off of the river water. We grow the cover crop, we grow, the deer love the vetch. They love various things that we have in our cover crop. So you'll be walking along these aisles now, even now, you'll see deer piles, right? So they're staying in here, they're eating it, they're drawn into it. In the wintertime, they spend all their time in here because this is a major food source. And the deer are peeing and pooping. I've seen deer have babies out here because we have an irrigation canal right across that berm right there where they have access to water. So it's basically like home, right? They've got the cover, they can hide, and they just wander it back and forth. Even the vetch and the cover crops are reseeding. So we don't even plant these seeds, right? This is a self-perpetuating cycle. I haven't planted any cover crops out here for years because the species that do well just establish themselves in their own little place. And each species brings its own fertility, its own little niche that it develops the soil, feeds the soil, feeds the organisms that feed the soil. So it's a big web of life. Wow. Let's just walk. So here's a female. That's the seeds of the asparagus are right there in those pods. Oops, lost it. And then the ones that don't have the pods on them, little black seeds basically. The ones that don't have pods on them, this would be a male. So it's just going to have blooms on it. It's going to be like this when it comes out. And it's going to bloom. We're kind of late in the season for that. We'll still find some here and there, but here you go. Here's a good look at it. So this is a male just in full bloom right now. If you notice, the color down there is kind of purple. That's what it kind of looks like when it comes out when we harvest. But once it gets to this point, it's way too late to harvest. But you see it's in full bloom. It draws bees, bumblebees, butterflies. And then down here we have, this is a brassica, some kind of version of like broccoli. It's one of our components in the cover crop mix. We have, if I can find the white flowers, they have lots of different species. Let's take a look over here. Oh yeah, here you go. So this is a tillage radish. Right there, that's one of our components of our species. And it basically puts a big taproot down and breaks the soil open, which creates that airflow inside the soil, sort of like an earthworm, but more like mechanically. So we have tillage radishes. There's some more tillage radishes there. You can see the diversity. I mean, there's all kind of different kinds of, there's grass, there's weeds, there's vetch. This is a, let's see what that, it's just fascinating how, as you do this, you get a larger and larger diversity of species all working together, and it reaches that stability. Because that's what we're really aiming for, is a stable, healthy, biodiverse system that, creates a crop in its time. So, 2 acres. Let's see. Speaking of, right there, fertility from the animals. That's deer poop.
Okay.
Yep. Yeah, that's fertility that we're piggybacking on. What else do we have?
So how does this contrast, if I may ask you, Tim, to the idea that has been taught in Christianity that the earth is cursed?
Right. Now we're getting into some theology overlap, right? Well, in the American history, with the colonization of the East Coast, they brought in, of course, cotton growing and tobacco growing. for export to Europe and things. And of course, they only had manures, so they were able to use natural manures. They didn't have all the synthetic fertilizers that we have today. But they ended up having the problem of basically impoverishing the soil by growing the same crops over and over and over again and depleting the soils. But in the American scene, the answer was simple. Just go west. You know, you got virgin country out there, you just plow up more ground and progress to the west and do the same thing. And we've spent 250 years doing that, 300 years doing that, and we're all out of land because everybody's in California plowing it all up. And they're now seeing in California the very same problems, types of problems, that they saw in Virginia back 300 years ago. So that's one of the reasons why regenerative agriculture is catching on, is because, you know, if you're using a chemical system in a conventional application, you're really a chemical farmer. And what they found is that the more you use the chemicals, which can create a short-term effect of high fertility, high yields, very big productivity. But the more you use it, the more the biological life recedes and it basically degrades. So the more chemicals you have to use to keep up. Think of it like an addiction, right? To get that high, you have to, whatever substance you're using to be addicted, you have to keep using more and more and more to reach that same output. Whether it be, you know, weed-killing products, herbicides, whether it be fertilizers, synthetic fertilizers, it doesn't matter. The chemistry is very powerful, which is a good thing, helpful thing in certain applications, but it also is very destructive over the long term of the existing environmental biology. And so the question is sort of, how long can the chemical farming go until you reach this point of soil degradation to the point where, you know, it can't sustain a crop, or it creates a crop that's unhealthy, so you have more disease problems, or you have more susceptible to bug infestation, because bugs and pests are generally bottom feeders. They're eating on the unhealthy plants. And so when you have really healthy plants like this, we have virtually zero bug problems, because this is not attractive to pests. They would rather be down there eating on things that are basically half dead or dying or imbalanced or unhealthy to begin with. So by bringing the health in from the soil up, the health is radiated out to all the plants, which removes the problem of pests, removes the problem of disease. Things don't get out of balance. It's a balanced system.
Yeah, the bugs that are here are actually helping.
Yes, each of those things are fine as long as they stay in a relationship balance to everything else. So that's what we see as the natural result of keeping the balance.
Right.
And but as to your question, the cursed earth, does this look cursed to you?
Not at all. I think this looks like the Garden of Eden.
Well, we do call it covenant gardens for a reason, but that's sort of code, because a lot of people don't understand the full theology behind covenant gardens being Edenic.
Right.
That's the name, the name origin. So, any other question? I don't see it as cursed. I don't believe that's a proper reading, because what that ends up doing is, Steve, if you think about it, if this is a cursed earth, then we have to fight the soil.
Right.
We have to fight the pests. We have to fight the weeds. And as soon as we do that, we're basically saying our way is better and we're in control, to the point where we can be very, it's almost an arrogance that we know better than everything else. We know how plants should grow. We don't need all those other things. We want to eliminate them because they hurt our bottom line. Because a lot of this goes down to greed. Just point blank. A lot of it's just plain
I'm shocked.
American
I'm shocked that
greed.
greed would have anything to do with this.
And yet, what's amazing, Steve? Without any inputs, just being stewards of the system, of the ecosystem,
Keeping the garden.
we can be extraordinarily profitable right here as a byproduct, not as the goal, as the byproduct of life, building on top of life, and building on top of life, and overflowing to the grocery stores in Bozeman, to the farmers market in Butte, to the people in Helena, right?
Yeah.
So I think in our interview I talked about there's a lot of overlap between preterist theology and regenerative agriculture, and this is sort of an explanation of how that works. We're not really here in charge of a sense of dictating our will upon the soil or the ecosystem or the river, the water we use, or anything else. We're really just participating in the biological processes that already exist and that have been developed over a long, millions of year past, that we are now benefiting from.
So you're saying that information that came from way in the past is kind of like forgotten, and then it's kind of having a resurgence?
Regenerative
Like
agriculture.
preterism.
There's another overlap. I agree.
yeah.
I agree. So it's a little bit of both and, because the Amish have historically had a very high view of the land and taking care of the land and avoiding chemicals, avoiding synthetics. So the Amish have done some regenerative type of farming, but soil biology only came into its own as its own science since the 1950s and 60s. There's so much biology that we still don't know. The complexities are mind-boggling of soil biology. We did not know about soil biology, for example, when they started using nitrates to grow crops. We had no idea of the exquisite amount of how many organisms, billions of organisms in the soil, all doing their own thing, and how bringing in nitrates and other synthetic fertilizers, how that interacts with that soil life. They were putting on fertilizers after World War II, because the whole point of the Green Revolution in the 1940s was to keep the bomb factories that were making munitions for World War II in business. Because the nitrates that you make bombs out is the same nitrates that you make fertilizer. And so how do you keep all these factories going after World War II with all these employees? You can't let them all just be jobless. You can't turn the factories off. Well, the chemist says, we could use those nitrates. We could just apply them to fields and create double gains, more production. So you have World War II ending. This is the context. You have bomb factories. You have Americans who want to keep their jobs. So what does the government say? We need a United States Department of Agriculture policy of get big or get out. Use these synthetic fertilizers and you will increase your yields. You will be a rich farmer.
Yeah. Wow.
And then DuPont and the other chemistry companies, they, instead of using the gases that they were using for like nerve gas and warfare, like poisons, oh, we can poison bugs with those. We can tweak them to where you can use them on your farm, and you don't have to worry about bug infestations anymore.
DDT.
Do you see the temptation there?
Yeah.
It was like the natural, logical thing to do. And while you're going about this, people are discovering, oh wait, soil biology, holy cow, there's stuff going on under there we had no idea about. 1950s, 1960s, 1970s. We're finding things in the soil we didn't even know existed down there. Fungi. We're discovering how fungi and bacteria and everything works in a symbiotic relationship. While every year,
Isn't it amazing? Just think about this.
every year they're just putting down nitrates. Plow with the corn, with anhydrous, anhydrous ammonia. You plow it in with a corn row. You put the corn seeds right on top. Boom! Big corn crop. We had no idea what we were doing. We had no idea what the I'm talking 3 generations down effect of that is.
Yeah.
because we don't care about the future. We want to have the mortgage paid off this year
The profits
and a
now.
profit farm now.
Yeah.
So it's absolutely fascinating how long-term thinking, which is preterist theology, the implications of preterist theology. We're not going anywhere.
That's right. Long term.
How do we
You know, I'll go
provide
back
for
to
our
Genesis,
next generation and the next generation and the next
the
generation?
tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Once Adam comes into the knowledge of this, right,
Yes.
but he doesn't know how to manage it,
Right.
it produces death.
Right.
Whereas the tree of life produces life and more life.
Greed produces death, cancer, disease, illness. We are now living, for the first time in modern history, where life expectancy in the United States is going down. In the last 10 years, life expectancy for Americans in the United States statistically have now begun to decrease.
Wow.
That's 30 years after, 40 years after, 50 years after all of this innovation. And it created a boom. So there's always that side because it fed the world, right? So we export grain to Russia and to Africa and to other places that are starving. I'm not saying it's all bad, but the problem is it's sort of like that story about the hen that lays the golden egg, right? If you kill the hen, nobody gets any eggs. So if you have the hen that lays the golden egg, you be patient. You understand the limits of biology. You understand the limits of what God made, and you respect that, and you work within that context. That is regenerative agriculture.
That's awesome. So would you say that the love of money is the root of all sorts of evil? Is that what you'd say? Yes.
That's about how you could sum it up.
Thank you for showing us all this.
Yeah.
That is awesome.
Get a panorama. Let's go 360.
This time we're not using the AI, we're using the Steve Magua.
Let's check your.
Oh, sorry.
No, let's check and see if it's still recording. I hope it is.
I forget all about that when I get into my
It is.